Everyone's talking about how consulting markets are more competitive than ever before. And I think I might have shared this little anecdote on a previous episode, but every time I run a workshop, our positioning workshop, more specifically, powerpositioningworkshop.com, I ask folks in the room, how long have you been consulting for? 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, 5 years, 3 years, just started. We usually have a really good mix of people in the room. And I ask the folks who have been consulting for more than 5 years, have you noticed an increase in competition in the past 5 years? And overwhelmingly, the response is yes, absolutely, way more competitive. There's way more people out there now hanging out at their shingle, and it feels like it's really been taken to the next level more recently. Why is that? I'm not going to belabor this point here, but COVID, work from home, first wave of new consultants entering the market because they like working from home, wanted to be independent, and up until then, there was no way to work remotely in a job context. It wasn't mainstream. So folks went independent to benefit from the work from home kind of balance side of things. And then now as a recession hit, layoffs, the job market, now it's just really hard to get a job. So we're speaking to a lot of consultants who are frankly open, like we want to be consultants. We like the idea of consulting. I also wouldn't mind taking a job, but I can't get a job that's, at least at the right pay grade and that's commensurate to my experience. And so because of the challenges in the job market, there's just a lot of really experienced consultants now vying for the same business you are. And I think this was said to me quite eloquently in a recent conversation where somebody said, look, I have a lot of experience at the director and VP level. I mean, I was fairly senior and I'm really, really good at what I do. But, on paper, I'm competing with people who have decades of C-suite experience who can't get jobs right now. So therefore, they're out there consulting out of necessity. And from the market's perspective, why would they hire me when they can hire somebody with C-suite experience in my field and potentially decades of it? So on paper, how do I compete with these consultants who are not just because there's lots of them, but there's lots of really experienced executives who have now become consultants that are hard to compete with? What to do, Carrie?
What to do? There's a ton to unpack here, honestly, because the first thing I thought of when you talk about this scenario that this person kind of brings up, right, is how they're defining competition, right? You likely know these people because you're in this business, because you're connected, right? Like you have a sense of the fact that, Susan just lost her job and now she's going to consulting and, it's been tough where Frank came from. And so he's putting out a shingle. All of those things. I think what's interesting here is the notion of the capability that somebody has to solve problems, right? To be a good consultant, and the capability that somebody has to bring that expertise to the market. And just because somebody's out there unemployed saying, I'm doing consulting now, right? Which every person who becomes unemployed often says, right? That doesn't necessarily mean that they have the skill set to get them into the, the meetings and the conversations that you may be having because of the way that you have in fact defined how you show up, right? How you've positioned yourself, how you've marketed yourself, how you appear in the market. And so I think first thing you need to do is just to be really cautious of assuming that that's making your life difficult, right? Assuming that all these people are going to come in and eat your lunch, because you don't necessarily know that that's true.
It's a really important point, and one that frankly I wasn't even thinking about, is that just because somebody has more corporate experience than you do does not make them a better consultant. They may be a better C-suite executive because they've done that for longer than you have, absolutely. But does that skill set carry over into consulting? Not directly. I mean, they may have a certain amount of domain knowledge and certainly can execute within a corporate environment, and that's very different from solving problems for money as a consultant. And so I think you're very right to question whether more corporate experience translates into a stronger consulting value proposition. It's almost like if you're looking at it from a job perspective, if you're looking at resumes, right? Yeah, the C-suite resume is a better resume than your resume as a VP and director. Absolutely. That's true. From a job, if I'm hiring, I prefer the C-suite person over the VP or the director person, unless they're overqualified, which is also a real thing. But no one's looking at your resume when they're looking for a consultant, right? No one's looking at it from that angle. The question is not who has more experience. The question is who's better equipped to solve my specific problem. And those decades of C-suite experience may or may not help. It really depends on the context.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the reality is that if we sort of stick to this model of like the C-suite versus not, right? C-suite roles are by definition generalists. That's what they need to do, right? They need to be able to oversee, they need to be able to manage, broadly. And what you should be out there doing if you're a consultant who has found their position is selling a very specific solution. And so, it might be exciting to have, a previous C-suite person in whatever discipline have a conversation with you about potentially solving your problem. It'll become very clear very quickly that they haven't solved this particular problem, 10 times in a row over the last 6 months.
Yeah.
And so it comes down to the conversation that we often have, which is, is it better to be a generalist or better to be someone who has a specific product to deliver?
Yeah. And I mean, we're going to poo-poo on C-suite people today, apparently, but no, we'll look at it from all perspectives, right? But just to run with that point for a minute, put yourself in a C-suite executive's position who's hiring a consultant. Would I rather hire a peer who's just as high level as I am and not really in the weeds by virtue of their level previously, or do I want to hire somebody who's got a lot more experience, to your point, in the weeds, executing on projects, which I know that the C-suite executive does not have because that's not what they do, right? And the point of this is not to poo-poo on C-suite executives, right? The point of this is that more senior or less senior people all have different value propositions. That C-suite executive can formulate a value proposition that's different from the director or the VP. The point is to find stop thinking in job mode. Stop thinking in terms of resume versus resume. Start thinking in terms of unique abilities and strengths given your experience, and then pairing those with client problems. Because I think the point that you're making here is really critical. Comparing one generalist to another, yes, the generalist with more experience is going to win, but that's not the game we want to play. We want to specialize such that the more experienced generalist is still perceived as a generalist and therefore not very relevant to me.
Yeah. And it comes down to fit. I mean, all of this comes down to fit, right? And to your point, like, it's not about good and bad. It's not about, some kind of binary choice. It's really about who is the best fit for the job. And if you've been able to define, first of all, what the job is, right? And then position yourself and, have clarity. And this comes from inside, right? This is internal clarity and confidence that you are in fact the best fit to solve a particular specific problem, and not the best fit to solve 100 other problems that exist out there. That's when people start to pay attention, because they want the person who is going to do, the absolute best work for them. And that means the person who understands it, right? That means the person that lives and eats and sleeps and breathes the very problem that they're trying to get past.
And look, here's a philosophical question for you. Let's say the C-suite executive or the more experienced executive is a better consultant. Let's just say that's true. We've obviously given you lots of reasons to call that into question, but let's just park those and we're dead wrong. Okay. They're just better. That person's better than me. Let's just say that's true. Does the best product always win in markets? Does the best product always sell the most? Is the best product always the market leader? Do inferior products sometimes outperform and outsell superior products? Absolutely. Absolutely. Because there's a whole angle to this called marketing. And often what happens in markets is the best product doesn't win. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't strive to be the best. You absolutely should. But what happens in, all markets is the best product doesn't always win. Technically, it's the best marketed product wins. So, for example, Mr. VP consultant versus C-suite consultant. C-suite consultant rests on his laurels and taps into the network that he has and goes back to the folks that already know, like, and trust him and maybe secures some deals. But Mr. VP consultant goes and expands his network and expands the scope of his market, meets new clients, meets new organizations, has better messaging, has better positioning, has a more compelling offer, has better pricing structures, and masters and excels at the business of consulting in ways that the C-suite executive doesn't think that they need to. Who's going to win in the long run? I'll tell you who I'm betting on right now. It's the less experienced, inferior consultant who is better at the business of consulting.